Oh, she is, hands down, by far. It's not even close.
Oh, well, I am.
Yeah, Mary is. No question.
Kelly.
Not me.
He is.
She is.
She is.
My advice to a couple that is just starting out is to date, and more date.
The secret to happiness in marriage is laughter.
Yes.
I think the most important thing is you have to choose to say I do every single morning. Then you are choosing to be with this person that day.
Relationships are a journey, and journey's got to go somewhere. The beginning is really exciting and fun, and the middle is very challenging. And in the end, you're just happy, not that it's over, but just of what you've been through. So.
Secret to happiness in marriage, do not take yourself too seriously.
When we first got married, we had 2 rules. You're not allowed to call each other names, and always have ice cream in the freezer. And so far, so good.
Except for last week, we didn't have any ice cream in the
It's true,
freezer.
actually.
She called me
Hey, well, it is great to see you this weekend, and we're so glad that you're here. Whether you were joining us in Valencia, or you're watching us in Simi Valley at Discovery Church, or watching us online, really, really glad that you're here. And next weekend is Super Bowl weekend, and some are excited about that. Some are just done with football. But you know what? We're happy for the Rams. Go Rams, okay? Anyway, on Super Bowl weekend, we have a tradition around here at our campuses, which is you wear your favorite jersey. And so it doesn't matter if it's an actual team in the NFL or if it's your kids' softball league or whatever, go ahead and wear it. And it's just kind of a fun thing that we do. But we're also kicking off a brand new series next weekend, which I'm very excited about. And we had a chance to film just kind of a brief commercial that goes along with our series while we were in Israel. So take a look at this, and it kind of sets you up for what we're going to start talking about next weekend, kicking off on Super Bowl weekend.
So in the first century, the Romans and the Jews got into it, and the Romans said, enough of y'all. And they decided to wipe out everybody. And they marched down throughout Israel, just wiping out towns. A group of people that were just rebels with Herod's army retreated to this huge mountaintop called Masada. And it is here that they held up, trying to preserve the last of Herod's kingdom. But as Romans do, they found them, they encircled the mountain, and they eventually made their way up this mountain and destroyed everything. But they discovered also that everybody up here had already ended their lives. Why do I show you all this from Israel and all the tours going through it? Because this was the vast kingdom of Herod, and now it's a tourist site. All kingdoms fall, even yours, even mine. In this next series, we're going to discover the backwards kingdom of Jesus and how that kingdom never ends.
Okay, so weird name to say, Maganik, but it is the backward kingdom of Jesus, and we're going to be kicking that off next weekend as we walk through the next 8 weeks talking about that, and it's going to be really, really helpful, especially for those of you that are kind of new to this whole faith thing, and you're thinking, what's the difference between this and, I'm spiritual, and I got a little bit of Buddhism, and I got a little bit of, Judaism that I grew up with, and Catholicism that I got in school, and I'm just kind of this, mismatch of things. What is this whole following Jesus thing? Is it any different? And this series is really going to break that down and help you understand what it means to be in the kingdom of God and how that just kind of comes to bear in your life. And I'm really excited about it, and we're going to have a great experience kicking that off next weekend. Okay, today we are wrapping up our 4-part series called What Happy Couples Know, and all the guys are like, finally, okay? Because you've had homework every week, and you've had stuff to do and talk about with your spouse, and you've talked about your relationship more than you ever dreamed you would, and you're grateful that it's about over. So we're just going to recap a little bit, and if you missed any of these, you can catch up online, or you can watch it through the app or whatever. But basically what we've discovered are 3 things so far about happy couples. Happy couples understand this box, and they understand that they brought with them into their marriage, into their relationship, a box of hopes and dreams and desires. And those might be hopes, dreams, and desires about where they're going to live, how much money they're going to make, how they're going to spend it, how they're going to raise kids, if they're going to have kids, how they manage conflict, all those kind of things. And then there's also some intangibles deep within there, things about love and respect and being cherished or being admired or all those kind of things. And it's all in this box. And when we get married, we exchange boxes. We don't say that, but we just assume that now you're going to fulfill this in my life. And suddenly this box turns into a bunch of expectations. Happy couples know that it can't be an expectation. In other words, happy couples decide they owe each other everything but are owed nothing in return. They stop with the expectations. And then the second week, we talked about how happy couples basically decide they're going to race to the back of the line. In other words, Christian marriage is a submission competition. I'm going to try to put you ahead of me. That's our competition with each other. And happy couples have decided your box is more important than mine. Mine's still important, but your box is more important than mine. Then last week we talked about what do you do with the box when there's stuff in there that your spouse is not meeting, and maybe they weren't even made to meet those kind of things because only God can meet those kind of things. And we talked about happy couples know sometimes you have to throw things, and not at each other. But you throw your casting your cares and your anxieties upon God and telling Him in your most impolite prayers what it is that you need in your life. And you get honest and vulnerable with God. And my prayer is you have been doing that this week. So today we're going to wrap it all up with one thing that may be the most important thing that we do in having great relationships. So for everybody who's married, everybody who hopes to be married one day, your goal is to take this one thing we're going to talk about today and make it more than just a choice, make it more than just a goal, but to make it an inward reaction that just happens like that without you even having to think about it. Almost muscle memory, and it's going to take some effort to pull that off. So really, the point of today's message is to point out a decision you're already making. But we're going to talk about the right way to make it and how that can become an instinct for us and radically change all of your relationships. And that answer, or that choice or decision that we're going to talk about really comes from this letter that the Apostle Paul wrote. And we read from this letter and this portion of that letter in week 1 as kind of our goal for this entire series. So we're kind of bringing it all together this weekend. And in that letter, the Apostle Paul is talking to a lot of people that had not grown up Jewish. They were what we refer to as Gentiles, but they'd grown up with all kinds of different pagan gods. And here's the way the pagan gods worked. And that is, you brought sacrifices to them. And in Judaism, they would bring sacrifices to God. And you would maybe, kill an animal, or you'd burn something up, or you'd leave a child, or maybe there was child sacrifice, and all these different kinds of things that people would do in pagan religions to get God's attention, because they were living with what we call kind of this, a vertical morality. Basically, what I do to make God like me. And there was a pantheon of gods. And they had all these different gods, and none of the gods liked them, and so they were constantly trying to get God's attention with their sacrifices. That's the culture Paul walks into. And Paul walks in there and starts telling them in this letter, no, that's not the way following Jesus works. This God is different. First of all, He's the one true God, and second of all, it's not based on this horizontal or vertical morality, it's based on a horizontal morality. In other words, the way you show God you love Him is to love His kids. In other words, what Jesus said, remember we talked about this in week 2, that you want to show me you love me, then here's what you do. You do unto others as I have done unto you. Love people the way that I've loved you. And Paul says that's the kind of faith this is. That's the kind of God you're following when you decide to follow after Jesus. That's what the standard is. So this is like mind-blowing for them. They can't even quite figure all this out. And so Paul decides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down for them. And I'm going to walk them through what this kind of love is really like. Now, what we're going to read today is probably something you've heard bits and pieces of before. Even if you've never been to church before, this is all brand new to you. You don't even know, if you have a Bible or if you don't think you've ever read one. This passage we're going to read, you've probably heard at a wedding before. You may have had this at your wedding and you forgot all about it. And your wife will remind you later. Yes, we read that to each other as part of our vows. Fantastic. So you're going to have to kind of go with me on this and ask yourself, have I heard this before? And better yet, Do I know what this really means? Because this particular chapter we're going to read from what we call 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is often referred to as the love chapter. And some of you are thinking, yeah, I've heard this, or I've got it on a picture at home, or whatever. We're going to get to a little line in the middle of it, which is so confusing. But it holds for us this one principle we're going to mine out of there that happy couples know. So here we go. Here's what the Apostle Paul writes about love. He says, all right, gang, let me tell you what love is all about. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, now, what does that mean? People back then would try to speak like they would assume an angel would. They would try to communicate in languages nobody understood because they were seen to be very spiritual. And there was this great outpouring of the speaking in tongues, as we see in the beginning of the church, where the apostles go around and start speaking in languages. Everybody can hear their own language no matter what they're saying. It's fascinating. And he says, if I were able to do that, if I worked really hard to speak like those guys did, or like we assume angels might speak, but if I don't have love, then I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. In other words, I'm just noise. Let me tell you why this passage is so convicting for me. Because people in my profession should not be valued based upon how well they speak. They should be valued on how well they love. Because speaking, while being a spiritual gift that God has given to some people, it's also a talent you can work on and hone and kind of get better at. But here's what he's saying. Don't judge somebody on just their talent. You want to know, do they really love? You want to judge me? Then ask my wife who I am when I'm not on stage. Ask my kids, because that's who I am. That's what matters most. Do I love rather than do I speak good? The same is true with every one of our talents. And Paul says, listen, I could have all of those abilities to speak like that, but if I don't love, it doesn't matter. Then he goes on. Look what he says next. And if I have the gift of prophecy, that I can tell the future, and I can fathom all the mysteries and have all the knowledge, and I have faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. In other words, if I am incredibly brilliant, which he was, if I've memorized everything in the Bible, which he was writing, if I'm able to predict the future, but I don't love, then I'm nothing. You see, knowledge is not an indicator of spiritual depth. Love is. And Paul says, that's the most important thing. And then he gives us one more analogy. He says this next one, if I give all I possess to the poor, and if I give my body to hardship that I might boast, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. In other words, if I do all these good deeds, but I only do it to make myself known, and I don't really care about those people, and I don't really love, and I don't really serve people when people aren't watching, then I'm nothing. And it's almost like he knows. It's almost like he knows that people are going to struggle with this. So you can almost see him kind of writing this down and scratching his head going, let's get real practical. Look what he says next. Let me tell you what love is. Love is patient. I mean, you know somebody who's patient, right? And you know when you're not patient, right? And don't we say to each other, I'm sorry, I'm a little impatient today, or, it's just a problem. And the reality of it is a patient person is somebody who lets somebody else go first. You go to the back of the line. That is our definition of what happy couples know, right? And kind, we've known kind people before, but you know what that word means for us? It means love deferred. In other words, you let others go ahead of you. I know that I'm right, but I'm going to just take a back seat and let you say what you need to say. And I'm not even going to tell you that I'm right, because maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to be kind. Then he says this next one, love is not jealous. This is that whole thing that, you see couples do sometimes where they just get bent out of shape at each other because somebody's more talented or gets more accolades or gets more, press or whatever it is, and they're kind of fighting for supremacy in the home. And he says, no, that's not love. Or it's not boastful either. It's not always trying to outdo each other, saying, oh, you think that story's good? Let me tell you one that's even better. Because I don't want him to be the life of the party. That's my job. That's not love. It's not proud or rude. It's not constantly talking about, their own abilities and what it is they've done and putting other people down. It does not demand its own way. Love does not say, we're going to do it my way or no way. My way or the highway. Love is not irritable. Now, I looked this up in the Greek. Here's what this means. Unless you've not had coffee. Okay, that's just, it's there. Trust me, okay? So, I mean, anything before coffee, that's just fair game, all right? But he's saying, do you have a short temper? Do you have a quick fuse? That's what he's talking about here. And then this one, I'm glad none of us do this. Keeps no record of wrong, all right? I heard a story just this week about a guy and his wife, and they argued constantly about who was the last to change the roll of toilet paper. Okay? I mean, the struggle is real, friends. And they were arguing about this, and she said, you never change the toilet paper. I have to always change it. And he said, that's not true. I change it all the time. Oh, you never do. So here's what he decided to do. Every time he changed it, he took the little roll that was empty, and he kept it. And he put it in a little garbage bag. And he did this for months and stored up this huge garbage bag full of these empty toilet paper rolls just waiting. And one day she says, oh, I got to change the toilet paper. You never change it. And he ran over there and he got his little, grabbed his garbage bag up, threw it down and said, look at that. And she said, you are insane, okay? That's just crazy. Why would you do that? That's keeping a record of wrong, right? I am going to be right. And some of you are thinking, that is a good idea. I'm writing that down. But he says it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. What does that mean? That's a little weird. We'll get to that in a minute. And then he kind of goes rapid fire on us as he wraps this up. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. He says, love always trusts. And this is the key principle. Let me illustrate it this way. In every relationship, there are expectations that happen. And then as experiences happen, a gap develops. Here's what I mean. I need you to be home by 6 because that's when everybody's coming over for dinner. And then I show up at 6:15. I need you to be home by 5. And I show up at 5:30. I need you to be home by 7. And I show up at 8. Do you see what's happening here? A gap is developing between expectations and experiences. This gap is where we decide, am I going to choose to believe the best, or am I going to assume the worst? Here's what happy couples know. Happy couples make it a habit to choose to believe the best. What the Apostle Paul is saying here is in this gap between what you expect and what you've experienced, you choose to have trust. Love never gives up, always hopes, always believes, assumes the best. Paul wrote that 2,000 years ago. Now, interesting enough, in the year 2000, Marcus Buckingham wrote a book, and it's a business book, and it's a fascinating book, and we have a picture of the cover of it here. The one thing you need to know, and it's a brilliant business book, and a lot of people have read it, sold millions of copies. But in this book, he chronicles a study that was done on happy couples. And these are couples that have lived a long, rich relationship together, and they've been married for many, many years, and they surveyed them with all of these different questions, asking them, why are they happy? Why do they enjoy their marriage? Why is it so rich and fulfilling? And their answers were fascinating to the people that were doing the research. They found out that the people, and they assumed that the people would say, well, we just lowered our expectations. We just kind of assumed that, hey, it's never going to get any better than this. This is as good as it gets, and so we just learned to make it happen. We just said, you know what, for the sake of the kids, we're staying together. And they found none of that. In fact, what they found was when they would ask to rate each other on various things, they always rated each other higher than that person rated themselves. They always rated their spouse higher than even their own self on various things. And what they discovered was maybe love truly is blind. These people have decided that their spouse is better and more wonderful than they ever could be. And here's what they came up with, this little weird, creepy phrase. They said, there is an upward spiral of love. And that's just kind of weird, isn't it? You're thinking, I don't even know what that means. Here's what they're saying. When that gap is established between expectations and experiences, instead of spiraling down to the worst possible scenario, they always spiraled up and assumed the best. Their recommendation was to come up with the most generous explanation. Every time somebody is not meeting your expectations for your hopes, dreams, and desires, you have a choice to make. Will you assume the best, or will you assume the worst? Will you spiral up, or will you spiral down? Now, there's some obstacles to this, obviously. I mean, one is what we experience. I mean, you just kind of keep having the same thing happen. And you think, well, this is not getting any better. And you spiral up till you can't anymore. And the other one is the fact that all of us bring our baggage into that new relationship, right? You are not a blank slate, nor is your spouse. You come with you with all of your difficulties from the past and your broken relationships and things that have been done to you and things that have hurt you, and all that history comes into it, and it really makes things difficult. But what he's saying here is, if you choose to assume the worst, suspicion can often be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And think about that. When you go looking for something, eventually you find something that's close enough for you to get bent out of shape about. We do that to our kids, right? If I go up there and find any kind of mess in your room, what are we looking for? Any kind of mess. And we find it. But think about what we do with our spouses. If we're assuming the worst, we're looking for anything. And then what does that do to our spouse? It puts them on pins and needles all the time, so they're not even themselves, and they're bound to make some kind of mistake where you go, oh, I got you. I knew it. And so with all that in mind, what do we do with those two verses that we can't quite make sense out of it? Here's what he says. Let's look at it again. Love does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. In other words, you assume the best. Love protects the relationship from suspicion. Love assumes the best. It gives a generous explanation for whatever has happened. Look at what he says next. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, endures through every circumstance. Here's what he's saying. Love is determined to trust anyway, till you just can't anymore. Now, I know there's exceptions to this. I know some of you have been through some horrific things, and you know you just cannot trust anymore. But I'm telling you, for a lot of us, it's just suspicion. For a lot of us, it's just fear of whatever happened to us in the past is going to happen again. What if you just decided, I'm going to assume the best, and I'm determined to trust anyway? So here's the question. Do you believe the best, or do you assume the worst? Now, I'm sure you've had your reasons, and I know there's a good explanation, but happy couples have decided, I'm just going to spiral upward instead of down. I mean, because think about it. What are the options? You could go with this long list here. Delight in uncovering mistakes, thrive on speculation, assume the worst, and embrace doubt. I mean, those are some great marriage vows right there, aren't they? Here's what I promise to do. It's going to be great. 50 years of that, wedded bliss. I mean, you don't want that, nor do they. And think about this in talking to your kids. If you sit down with your kids when they're, 16, 17 years old and say, listen, I know you're going to start dating here before long. Eventually you're going to get married. I'm just going to give you a little piece of advice. Here's the way you do this. Set a trap for them. And you just lie and wait. And they're going to fall into it, and then you've got them. And they're not going to pull a fast one on you because then you know. I mean, you don't want to do that. You don't want to give that advice to your kids. I mean, you want them to be wise, but yet you also don't want them to be detectives, You want them to make good decisions there. And the same thing is true for us. Most of us are focused too much on this and assuming the worst rather than believing the best. So, here's your last piece of homework. What if for the next 10 days, you chose to assume the best? You gave a generous explanation for everything, and see if you just begin to spiral upward. Now, they might make a mistake during that time. talk about it, have the hard conversation, and then start the timer over again and go for another 10 days. And what will begin to happen is you're going to begin to develop this reflex of every time there is a choice to be made of will I assume the best or will I assume the worst, you will spiral upward. You will make a generous explanation in that relationship, and the temperature and the tenor of the anger in your relationship will dissipate, and suddenly you're looking for the good in each other, and you're going to find what happy couples know. Let's pray together. God, we are so grateful for these words from Paul that tell us what it means to spiral upward, to assume the best, to make the best decisions we possibly can. And God, many of us are just overwhelmed with our relationships and our fear of the worst. God, we want to assume the best. So will you give us the grace we need to say the things we need to say, to do the things we need to do, and to honor each other with love. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.